which, as Lydia mentioned, I've been, in a way, living it for the last 45 years. And thank you, Naropa. You're the first person other than myself, I think, to have brought in, that I've heard, to bring in that comparison with what was happening at that time. Precisely 1980, my connection to Buddhism happened as a direct result of my response to that crisis. And I lived for 3 months in 1979, I would say with the conviction that we were about to be annihilated in a nuclear holocaust. And right now is a very comparable moment. I find it an extremely scary time, and especially very recently indeed. So I was on a retreat, the Vipassana retreat in a development Dharma Centre actually in France, over Christmas and New Year period. And it was wonderful. It was a completely silent retreat, no books, no phones, 9 hours a day, just looking at your mind. It was amazing. And I did not want to come back to what I knew was waiting for me, the situation in the world. So I told Olivia and Jamie before the meeting that I hadn't prepared anything, which in a way is true, but in a way it's not true, because I spent the last few days preparing for a meeting yesterday. I met with a group of climate funders. So this is the principal funder is one of the largest private climate funders in the world. It's endowed by a very wealthy billionaire who's giving all his money to solving child poverty and climate change. But there were 3 other big funding organisations in the room, so it was a pretty important meeting. This is some funding for the project that Olivia mentioned, Regeneration UK. And I had a tremendous struggle preparing for that meeting, because I could not go into that meeting not having the conviction that what I was trying to do would make a difference. And from when I came back from the retreat until about a day before the meeting, I could not find that conviction. I was looking out there at the world situation and feeling, it was already extremely dangerous. I don't know how much, people may know different amounts about the science, but 2025 was a pivotal year for climate change. That is the first time that we have crossed one of the 16 key tipping points in the climate system. So we know that that's the coral reefs. The Amazon is right on the brink. The Atlantic meridian overturning circulation, the reversal of the ocean currents around the world, which is a catastrophic event, is very, very close. We're close to about 6 of those major planetary tipping points where climate change begins to run out of control. And then we see the leaders of the most powerful nations in the world pouring literally, billions of tons of oil onto those flames and destroying the international order, which should be reigning in that situation. So it took me, I was worried that I was very underprepared for the meeting, because I was trying to work on a funding proposal to fund this regeneration, and I couldn't get into that kind of practical detail. I couldn't think about that. I was in this deep spiritual struggle to re-find my sense of hope. And I did. So, hope springs eternal in the human breast. It's so profoundly true. And it reflects, I think, a fundamental truth about life itself as well. And this is why this project that fingers crossed, they told me that they're going to let me know in a week if I got this funding, but I'm cautiously optimistic. I think they're going to back me. And so regeneration is, and I don't know if many of you in the room know about the use of this word within the climate and nature movement, but it is getting increasingly, really sort of reverberating through that ecosystem. Many people thinking, speaking, writing about and doing it. And essentially the point that's being made is, this is not a technical problem. This is a problem about our deep relationship with nature, which on a deeper level still is a problem about consciousness, right? You know, our human consciousness has got disconnected from its grounded in the web of life, the ecosystem that supports us and makes us what we are. And so we've been making war on the very, the fabric of life itself, actually, that we imagine. I want to say it's an extraordinary thing right at the beginning of the ecology movement. Rachel Carson's book, Silent Spring, which is one of the books that really launched that movement in the early 1960s. And there was a vicious reaction from the business community in the United States especially. And one business leader actually said this. He said, "We can do without plants and animals, but we cannot do without business." Somebody actually came out with it. But that is the thinking, isn't it? That is the thinking that is driving this crisis further and further into an extreme. That people, although they might think that was a silly remark, but they're acting from that mindset. Yeah. And we look at the images of the future, most of them, when you look at science fiction films, you don't see any plants or animals. You see stainless steel, concrete and glass, and flying machines and robots and human beings, but you don't see any plants or animals. Well, how are we going to manage without those? It's complete nonsense, isn't it? So something has gone deeply wrong with the consciousness of our civilization. And I think if we ask, there's so many wonderful things have been said already about the gifts that Buddhism has to offer. But I think possibly the most important thing, Arnold Toynbee said that the most important cultural event of the 20th century was the transmission of Buddhism to the West. And that is because there's a fundamental difference in the worldview that Buddhism has. The Western, we call it Western, I think that's geographically, I think it's an insult to the indigenous people of the Americas, actually, to call them Western. It's European sort of imperialistic civilization spread around the world, isn't it? But it has the particular sort of mental disorder that collective consciousness of that civilization is suffering from and has suffered from throughout its history, which is that it is completely fixated on the conceptual mind. And the problems that we're facing are problems that cannot be solved by the conceptual mind alone. So one of the things that's interesting that I'm finding, we were speaking about it in the conversation before lunch, someone said that they don't think Buddhism is being heard, and I said one place it really is being heard is within the climate action movement around the world, and at a high level. And Christiana Figueroa was just mentioned in the report back about that. And I've been incredibly fortunate to become part of the global Buddhist climate action community that she has created with the monastics from Plum Village. So Buddhism is actually right in there at the heart of global climate action, and it is influencing thinking in a profound way. And I think this is very hopeful kind of geopolitical fact, actually. Extraordinary and discovering. And I didn't really know this until I went to Plum Village in 2024 for the Global Climate and Nature Leaders Retreat. And there's an interesting history of why I went there. Because I'm part of the Jamyang community, so Jamyang Buddhist Centre in Kennington, but I lived in the north of England almost all my life, and I've been there a few times. But in 1996, I started the sister Jamyang Buddhist Centre in Leeds. And I, with a very dear friend, who I've been on 5 pilgrimages with this lady. She's a really, really special friend of mine. And we started an Eco-Dharma project there, and we did some events for Eco-Dharma. We worked with the Eco-Dharma Network, and also I worked with Olivia and others too, the Glasgow COP, so we kind of bonded quite strongly. But it got shut down. It wasn't being supported by our director. Shut it down because we wanted to publicise Extinction Rebellion Buddhist events, And he said, we can't have anything to do with that organisation because it's supporting illegal actions. So we then took it to our European group, and they were very enthusiastic, but then it fizzled out. But in 2024, the Jamming London Centre very skillfully put together various here supporting them. I'm so grateful to Jamming London because they organised a planetary crisis summit meeting. And they did it very cleverly because they were hosting the European meeting where all the centre directors and the European officers were coming, so that they would have opportunity to be there. And they also got messages of support video messages from 2 very high lamas and a written message of support from the Dalai Lama, so they couldn't ignore it anymore. I went to that meeting, but during 2024 I was enrolled in a full-time study program in our monastery in France. So I said I would normally be in this up to my neck, but I can't do much. But the one thing I want to do is to connect our Buddhist tradition with the Plum Village tradition, because I knew about the incredible work that Thich Nhat Hanh and that community have been doing for 60 years. Since, I mean, of course he was doing it in Vietnam, and then took it to the United States, and then to France. But I didn't know all the full story. But I had happened to meet with one of the monks there, a wonderful English monk, Brother Sturt, Brother Papling. And so I spoke to him, and he got me an invitation to this meeting. So I didn't really know what it was. I thought it was kind of some retreat for their community to talk about the climate. And I went into the meditation hall on the first evening. The first speaker was Christiana Figueres, the former executive secretary of the UNFCCC, the organisation that runs the COPs, and it is the international sort of body for climate action. She was there with 150 climate leaders from around the world who she kind of gathered. Christiana Figueres said that, first of all, Buddhism saved her life, and teaches Thich Nhat Hanh, because 2 years before the Paris Climate Summit, where she was the one who played a key role in getting the leaders of 196 countries to sign to a binding agreement to act on climate change. 2 years before that, she had a catastrophic breakdown in her marriage, and she was suicidal. And her friends directed her to Thich Nhat Hanh's teachings, and she said they saved her life. And then they enabled her to get that agreement. 196 countries with incredibly different priorities and agendas and situations. They all had to agree the same document. And she said she got it, she made that happen by this deep listening that Thich Nhat Hanh talks about, this incredibly powerful Dharma practice of completely opening your mind and heart to somebody and getting away from the conceptual mind, wanting to debate with them or agree with them or disagree, but just to hear where people are coming from. So she listened to all those countries and was able to find a way for them to come to agreement. So that's how important Buddhism is in this crisis, in my experience. So I am now in a process of trying to bridge two worlds. I just wanted to run back to the monastery, or buy a one-way ticket to Nepal and offer myself in service to my gurus in that part of the world. But I felt I made this commitment over and over again. I said, this is what I need to do. This is where I need to take my Dharma practice, is into climate action. And I don't know if I'm under or over time, probably over time. But I'll just say a couple of words about the project. So Regeneration, it's a book that I read while I was studying in the monastery. I originally intended to spend a full 7 years there. I was going to devote the rest of my life to Dharma study of fact. But this book was the first thing that for 5 years that had given me any sense of hope that we could get out of the mess that we're in. I was very involved in the deep adaptation movement from 2020. How we're going to get maybe small communities that might survive and preserve some of these values, spiritual values, because everything is collapsing. But that book by Paul Hawken, Regeneration, Ending the Climate Crisis in One Generation, extraordinarily optimistic book. backed by very, very strong scientific research, and many, about 100 expert researchers contributed to the book, and clearly showing that, yes, it is still possible. And it is through actually listening to nature and recognizing, and science has been, over the past, in recent years, a lot has been discovered about the incredible power of natural systems to regenerate themselves if we get out of the way, or we give them just a little bit of help here and there. So turning away from we are going to fix everything to allowing life and the spirit of life, the power of life to do it. We are part of that. We're not separate from it. So we need to allow that. What do we call it? I don't know what to call it, but the energy of life that we are, to stop trying to kind of control it, use it, instrumentalize it, but to allow it to flourish and allow ourselves to flourish in community together. So that opening that I spoke about of the deep listening, and a very interesting, I'm sorry, 2 minutes, great. I thought it was much less than that. Yes, I was just mentioning to somebody in the one-to-one there about very interesting. I'm doing some other kind of non-traditional stuff, like compassion cultivation training, secular compassion training, coming from Tubsin Jim, the Dalai Lama's main English translator, and other practices from Joanna Macy, who I worked with in the 1980s. And what I noticed is an interesting thing that happens is this kind of dyadic meditation. You're sitting, looking into somebody's eyes, doing a meditation together, and listening to each other. And this is, I don't know if it's part of traditional Buddhist practice, maybe it is, but I haven't seen it. But I think it's a revolutionary development in Buddhism, that we're getting out of our conceptual minds in our communication to one another, like breaking through the barriers that verbal language puts between us. Eckhart Tolle, I heard him once say that he thinks language will be unnecessary in 50 years because there is this mass awakening happening, and it's so great to hear him speaking about that, because he's got this very dry, down-to-earth, matter-of-fact manner, and saying these outrageous things. I think, oh, maybe it's true, maybe this really is happening. But anyway, I think that's how we need to think, because if there's going to be any hope in the situation that we're in, look at the objective factors there are. Something extraordinary has to happen, but maybe it will.